outfit that you picked out this morning, or even if you picked it out last night, the outfit that you're wearing right now, you may think that you picked it out, but actually you are affected by everything around you. You're affected by media, culture, your religion, others' religion, and costs, which all play into your psychological effects. These create limitations that are affect what you're wearing. It's pressure around you from your peers, from effects of media, everything around you. This creates the problem that we researched. There's a lack of opportunity to express oneself through fashion. I specifically researched the effect of social media. Social media, in my research, Shermer said that people are often shaped by collective trends that standardize their appearance. Many influencers affect what you're wearing. When you're scrolling through social media, strong celebrities and influencers dictate what they're wearing, which dictates what you're wearing. These trends create a desire for connection because you want to be just like other people. You want to be like the influencers that you see and the celebrities that you see. Sing Hall, one of the researchers who thoroughly researches fashion and fashion trends, says that identity clusters are created through media. Identity clusters are clusters of people who seek identity through other people. So this is naturally created in social media when people want to find identity and crave finding that identity. All of this creates otherness because you crave to find that identity, but nobody's actually finding it because it's all fake media. Social media is the problem, but it also can be the solution. Choe and On are strong researchers who actually work at Brown University. They say that consumer identities are strengthened when a brand reflects their sense of self. So when you see a brand on social media and you see like, oh, I look like them or I dress like them, it creates a sense of self and identity and belonging. So you feel like you belong and you know that you belong. This also creates social utopias. So utopia is a place where you feel a sense of belonging, you feel your sense of self, and you feel at peace. These are great to have in our world because it creates a sense of calm rather than just constantly looking and seeking for your identity. So these influencers can be a problem, but they also can be the solution because it makes people feel belonging and it makes people feel included. This creates a strong sense of culture, which Tanner will continue talking about.
Through my research and through the cultural lens, I've seen many connections between culture shifts in politics and in fashion changes. One example of this was written about by Laura Beltran-Rubio when she talks about a political change in Colombia where the people were disputing with the president and how they expressed themselves and their anger and their opinions that differed is through their fashion. This is explained a little bit by the sociologist George Simmel when he says, "The total rhythm in which individuals and groups move will also exert an importance of influence upon the relationships to fashion." So this means that the relationships of a group of people that are trying to make a difference in the world comes out in their fashion. And this relationship between culture shifts and fashion isn't just one way. The culture can change fashion, but fashion can also change how the culture goes. This is explained a little bit by Carl Sohn when he says, "Clothing is one of the features showing social and ethnic identity." So this means that what people are putting on in the outside kind of shows what they are believing in the inside and what they want to express to the rest of the world. This means that if people change what they're choosing to wear, it can show a change in their identity and in the culture as a whole. People can do this just by themselves very well and it can show their expression, but if people really want to make a difference, something that can be very helpful is fashion communities. Communities can help people get their point across better because it's a bigger platform that the world sees not just as one person, but as a whole movement in the world. When different people come together and have different ideas, they can actually change the cultures in a big way because everyone sees that it's a big movement that many people are trying to portray and trying to push to other people. Fuentes kind of says this when she writes about her article, and the main theme was when people participate in fashion, they're joining a fashion community that expresses them as a person. So this can help for self-expression as a person, but the community creates a platform that gets it out to the rest of the world. Another community that can be very helpful in this is religious communities. So Caitlin's going to talk a little bit about religious communities and specifically how it relates to fashion.
Yeah. So I researched how how a person's religion affects their fashion. So religious communities have certain guidelines for people to follow regarding their fashion. For example, Christian clergy wear vestments to symbolize their roles, and in the Islamic faith, they wear the religious garment hijab to cover their hair and often their bodies as a sign of modesty. These religious garments not only show others around them what their religious beliefs are, but also to help guide them in their faith and honor what they believe in. While these religious standards help guide people in their faith, they also limit the opportunities that people have for self-expression, because people are often conforming to the guidelines, and when people are all conforming, they don't express themselves authentically. But while people are conforming, there are different ways that you can add your own unique style by doing this. By adding your unique style, they're not conforming to one guideline, and they can do this by doing small changes to what they're already wearing, like different patterns and textures. And Ashton will be talking about the psychological and social effects that fashion has.
So I researched the psychological and social effects of fashion. The psychological effects of fashion is that it guards your mental health, and it's actually a shield from which you try to protect yourself from getting hurt and getting destroyed by public figures. And a recent example of this would be Kanye West and his mental disorders that he was going through, and actually choosing to guard himself with anti-Semitic clothing, putting a swastika on his shirt, and really guiding himself and protecting himself from the world around him. There's also social implications. While fashion refers to a specific system of dressing, it originates in the West, is what Anushka Das, a psychologist from Ohio State, said. In the West, we see that culture and fashion is often more advanced than other countries like Africa and Asia, which creates a large, diverse groups, like Tanner said, with communities, that almost allows you to have more self-expression through these social identities. And Rocco will be talking about the economic implications.
I looked at fashion and otherness through the economic lens. One thing that I did focus on at first was fast fashion and how brands constantly creating a new line of clothes or sets kind of gives the feeling of needing to catch up and be in and not necessarily have FOMO. And it also creates a sense of laborers trying to maximize their profits, overwork laborers, and try to cut prices. And then another sense of otherness with fashion is fashion waste hurts the environment, and fast fashion companies usually export its damage to less fortunate communities. And then finally, luxury fashion effects. Luxury brands also create otherness, but not in the same way as fast fashion, kind of like showing like this slow making of fashion, kind of giving people the sense of superiority that they have better clothes than others. Our solution, thanks, Tanner.
So our solution was kind of made through a little bit of all of our lenses. We realized that, like Grace said at the beginning, that many people look at celebrities for what fashion they want to wear. So our solution was a campaign of lots of political leaders and religious leaders and celebrities specifically that go out and really say that they're wearing what they want to wear, that expresses their ideas that they have. So instead of brands telling celebrities what to wear, they're choosing to express themselves. Some pros and cons of this would inspire others to express themselves more fully also, but a con is it could just shift the trends from what the celebrities were wearing before to just what they're wearing now, instead of everyone expressing themselves individually after this. This would change the culture for everyone trying to express themselves individually, and some limitations could be some people might not have the money or might be hindered, like Caitlin said, by their religions to do this. Yeah, thank you.
example of a compelling argument from one of your peers, IRRs, that you decided to exclude from your presentation and why?
One that we decided to exclude was in Caitlin's argument. She talked a lot about specific religious wear and dress that we really feel like we could dive into and talk about the effects of it individually with each culture. But we felt that that took away from the overall feel of talking about otherness and the different effects of fashion, and it was too specific, so we decided not to include it.
Thank you. Tanner, if you had another team member, what other perspectives or limitations could they have researched that would have made a useful contribution to the project?
I think if we had a teammate that could have done a historical lens and could have looked at how people have tried to make these fashion movements before, would have been helpful to see what their problems were and what the outcomes of their movements were before.
Thank you. Caitlin, how did your group decide to include Rocco's perspective, lens, or conclusion into your overall presentation?
We decided to add Rocco's because we looked from everybody else. We looked at like religion and culture and everybody random, but economic is like individual, and some people might not have the ability to have certain fashion things because of where they're at economically.
Ashton, describe an argument from one of your peers' IRRs that made you think differently about your team's solution.
When Caitlin was researching the religious aspect, I really got to dive in deeper and kind of understand why people wear what they do. And the religious aspect is more of a tradition sense and how it can limit self-expression.
And Rocco, give one specific way your thinking has changed as a result of learning about some other students' findings, and you can select the student.
I think Ashton's kind of way of talking about Kanye West and how he almost protected himself with the I don't know how to say that word. Stuff on his clothes, that definitely helped change my thinking perspective on maybe the different side of it.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
The tension between education and creativity. To understand the importance of creativity, we must first define it. Psychologist Dr. Robert E. Franken says this: the tendency to generate or recognize ideas, alternatives, or possibilities that may be useful in solving problems, communicating with others, and entertaining ourselves and others. Students and educators around the world have acknowledged the shortcomings of the educational framework and the need for reformation as a greater need arises for innovators and creative problem solvers. Which leads to the question, how does the modern education system hinder creativity and individuality, and how can curriculums be restructured to foster a more self-expressive and innovative environment? And now to Abby with the problem.
To understand why the lack of encouragement of creativity in education is a problem, we have to look at where it started. But first I want to show you the statistic done by a study by Mr. Landon Jeremiah in 1968. So in this study, they tested kids for levels of creativity. 98% of children ages 3 to 5 scored a genius level of creativity. By age 10, it fell to 30%, 12% by age 15, and only 2% in adulthood, which is whopping numbers. So if we think about what connects childhood and adulthood, it would be school. And so that's one of the reasons we decided to look into it. So let's go back to Prussia in the late 1800s. They were war-ridden and they needed soldiers. And so the school system began. They introduced the concept of mandatory schooling. And while the literacy rates increased in Prussia, their education system was indoctrination disguised as education. Prussia also introduced the concepts of sitting in rows, raising your hand, standardized tests, rigid curricula, 8-hour school days, and things like that. Fast forward just a few years, we're going to the Industrial Revolution. This is the late 1800s, early 1900s. The Prussian school system started to spread globally, except in America specifically, the goal had shifted a little bit. It was now no longer to have obedient soldiers, it was to have obedient, efficient factory workers, because every job then was machines, factories. And so the main goal of school was uniformity. We have the things like sitting quietly for 8 hours a day in rows doing your work. They didn't want creativity, they wanted everyone to be able to do the exact same thing. I want to show you this graphic from a school classroom about 100 years ago and to now. You can notice that between the teacher, the desks, the students, the classroom, it is almost exactly the same. As the world evolves around us, our school system remains pretty outdated and it's the same. And our school system isn't broken. The lack of creativity encouragement in schools is exactly what it was intended to be. Now to winter and the problem with it is that students with a lack of creativity often are stressed and only focused on their schoolwork and grades. This is a quote from an 11-year-old student. The sad reality is that when grades dictate your future, you cannot afford to experiment or make mistakes. Budget cuts to things like arts, play, and music often limit students even more. And not only do the students recognize it, the teachers do too. In a study done by Dina Aish, 61% of participants, teachers, strongly disagree when asked if the education system allows for the manifestation of creativity. I'd like to hand it to Winter to present our solution.
Alright, the first solution that we came up with was classical education. Now for any of you who don't know what this is, it's an entirely different system. This system is based in the classics, so literary arts and like kind of a scientific method way of teaching, where you basically try something and then based on what you find with that, you change your entire way of teaching to basically fit the students. What I mean by it's based in the classics, that's things like Huckleberry Finn, Tale of Two Cities, things like that, where they kind of speak to our history and where we've come from, where we're going. It even goes back to like Plato, Aristotle, and the great thinkers. Now, to incorporate this, the problem with it is that it has to be gradually incorporated. What this means is that we can't just start giving it to students in high school and expect them to do well with it, because it's like a completely different turn than what they're used to. The pros of this is that it helps with critical thinking growth and as well as problem solving and communication skills. They do a lot of speaking, memorizing, things like that, where it allows you to kind of understand the human psyche. The main con with this is that it doesn't have direct vocational training. What this means is that you're not directly training to, like, say you want to be an engineer, you're not learning specifically to be an engineer. You're learning to communicate well, and you're learning the math and the science behind engineering, but you're not specifically going into engineering. You're learning so that you can be okay with any career. I'd like to pass on to Mason to present their next possible solution.
So the next solution that we found when researching this topic was the incorporation of alternative assignments designed to promote creativity in students. What this would be able to do is just improve the creativity rates in the students and just intentionally try to foster it. In a study done just last year, Habit, Vogel, and Thorne put college students into creative focused classes and then had them write reflections after they took it. One student said, "I began to find confidence in my uncreative abilities in a way I never had before." This is just proof that this can work. So to incorporate this, we just would have to add new assignments or courses into the current curriculum, and could possibly even have creativity be like a core class, like math or science. But this is limited by putting too much work on the teachers, because adding a whole new class and whole new assignments would be a lot of work on them. Some pros of this solution would be that this would really, really help to foster the creative confidence in students.
but then again, it also just is a whole lot of work on the teachers, and each student is different, and it's a short-term solution in the fact that this could still fall back into the factory model of the current problem if it's not maintained and updated. And now to Caden to continue.
In light of the pros and cons and the limitations and implications of the two solutions presented by Winter and Mason, we think that it would be beneficial to incorporate both solutions in different time increments. So for short-term, alternative solutions present an idea of, it's an easier implied solution of where it can be incorporated easily, just like that, into new education systems and curricula. It is especially beneficial towards younger education, but through the background, we would also like to explore the idea of classical education. And this idea through the background will be trying to grow its implication and its usefulness behind the idea of alternative assignments. So the long-term goal would be classical education, but some concerns that comes with this is, what about math and science? Through literary arts, it can sometimes mask that. Well, through a study done by Samara Bonbro, she found that it is beneficial long-term in the brain to retain all subjects through a literary arts perspective. That is, through these literary arts, it's easier to remember to call back to math and science subjects, even through these creative assignments. So in the end, we think it'd be beneficial for both assignments or both solutions to be incorporated, one for the short term, but in the background, a long term. Now to pass it on to Izzy for the next conclusion.
There is reasonable doubt about work ethic and academic performance when it comes to implementing these solutions and possible decrease in literature rates and other things like this. But a study done by Beghetto and Kaufman showed that this takes the opposite effect, and literacy rates and academic performance actually improves. Which leads to a quote from Don Dupriest at the National Education Association, who says, "The most important reason to teach with creativity is one that is rarely assessed, but is key to a child's educational success. They'll love school."
Izzy,
Oh, the recording just
reflecting
stopped.
on your colleagues' work, which one had the greatest impact on your overall understanding of the problem that your group identified?
Which had the most overall impact on the understanding?
Yes.
I would say Abby's, because it really gave me a sense of, it helped me see how far the problem had gone back, because I had only researched the Industrial Revolution, but I had no idea that it extended into the world with Prussia and that study that she had about the genius levels of creativity within younger kids and decreasing into adulthood.
Abby, if you had another team member, what other perspective or limitation could they have researched that would have made a useful contribution to your project?
I think if we had a group member researching financial or economic through an economic lens, it would be really helpful for discovering more limitations, but also what can be done. I think it would be helpful to be able to research what's already being done, what budgets can be used for, and taxes and other implications like that.
Thank you. Winter, how did you decide to include Izzy's perspective, lens, or conclusion in the overall presentation?
Izzy's perspective was very based on what educators could do to solve the problem, and she was very focused on the solutions, and that's how we got the alternative assignment solution. Actually, was from her research. It's basically just looking at how educators can specify what their curriculum is to each student in order to make a more creative environment to incorporate whatever that student can give to society, and kind of helping them explore that.
Thank you. Mason, what is a way in which your team's resolution makes you think differently about your own individual research?
So when I was doing my research, I didn't really come across the classical education solution, but when we started converging all of our IRRs and coming up with the solutions we were going to put into our presentation, Winter proposed the classical education, and I thought it was really interesting because it like encompassed all of my research, but I didn't put a name to the concept, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you. And Kaden, give one specific way your thinking changed as a result of learning about Abby's findings.
And specifically Abby's lens, which was a historical lens, her idea of looking back to see where schools started, what was the reason behind it, it changed my overall perspective of what the purpose of school was. And it was to make people uniform. It was the entire opposite idea of our solutions. And it was trying to create this one student. It was one people trying to all collectively have one idea of what school is. And I think that idea helped me understand what the purpose of our solution was trying to make individual students themselves instead of trying to conform everyone into one idea.
Great, thank you.
Picture a world where photo or filters, viral trends, and image editing shapes what we believe beauty is. A world where people believe they have to change their faces, bodies, and even personalities in order to fit in. I'm sure most of you can picture something like this because it is the sad truth of the world that we live in today. These pressures don't just stay online, they follow us into workplaces, schools, and even into everyday life.
So how do unrealistic beauty expectations affect today's society? To do this, we have to look at beauty expectations historically, culturally, modernized, and mentally.
Beauty standards have evolved throughout history. In ancient Egypt, beauty was a symbol of status and spirituality. So beautiful women were tall and slender with small chests and wore eyeliner, lipstick, and blush. In ancient Greece, the ideal woman was plump with wide hips and small breasts and used dangerous bleaching techniques on their hair and toxic lead makeup products. And in the Renaissance, curvy women with pale, flushed cheeks and pale complexions were representative of beauty, wealth, and health. Although these ideals differ, they show the trend of beauty standards evolving through society and how women were pressured to conform to these expectations. The author Jessica Rotundi writes, one recipe from 1532 called for a pint of arsenic and 1/8 of a pint of quicklime to be applied in the bath and quickly removed so that the flesh doesn't come off. This shows that beauty expectations were not just unrealistic, but they were physically dangerous. Women were expected to risk serious harm in order to meet society's ideals, proving that beauty was an expectation that prioritized appearance over health. This is seen today with things such as plastic surgery and toxic products used in everyday life. Although beauty standards have evolved, the pressure to meet them has remained constant. Higher classes and artists have depicted beauty through paintings and through fashion styles. And today this role is taken over by media and celebrities, reinforcing comparison and unrealistic expectations even today. Historically, so what is the impact? Historically, beauty standards influence how people were treated in society. So people that conform to these standards were seen to have more value in society, whereas people that didn't were seen to have less value and were often excluded or judged. While beauty standards have shifted across history, their lasting influence is most clearly seen in how they became embedded with cultural norms and everyday expectations, which leads into Jacelyn's lens.
So with my lens, I focused on culture. And as I delved into this, I realized that every culture has their own standards based on how people are brought up and just the norms brought from people shifting over and changing places. And as I saw this,
there was a common denominator and Western ideals, and these have been pushed onto other cultures, even people who naturally do not fit these ideals, which makes it nearly impossible for them to reach them. And while it is impossible for them to reach these standards, it doesn't make it any less harmful. It actually makes it more harmful, striving for something that's unattainable. And Daniels in 2025 claimed in her journal, the hair of a Black woman has a specific curly texture that has been commonly manipulated to resemble straighter European hair. And as we see this, we've noticed that in westernized films and such earlier on, that African American hair that was curly is seen as unkept or messy, and people were often pushed to straighten this hair to appear more put together, and this affected their social standards and how people viewed them, not just in the workplace, but in common day life. And this doesn't just affect African women, it also affects many women in Latin countries. In Mexico, according to Crosser and Gomez, people use skin whitening creams and skin bleach to lighten their skin because lighter skin is perceived as a higher social class, and it's just a common practice now in many Latin countries. And this also affects how are these Western ideals pushed onto these other countries where they're not prevalently seen in natural beauty form, and we see that social media is the most powerful reinforcer of these standards.
So, what is the digital role that social media has in defining modern beauty? Social media promotes unrealistic appearance ideals that are very hard to attain and people feel pressure to achieve. This is because influencers use AI-driven filters to present perfected appearances to their followers that don't naturally look like human features. Idealized content harms adolescents, reinforcing the importance of content type over social media intake, which we see that algorithms use idealized content over non-idealized content. And this is designed to promote posts with higher engagement, and social media promotes also an idealized face, which is characterized by specific features such as plump lips, a natural or a straight jawline, and a button nose. The impact we have is huge, and Pickley says that frequent users often internalize these digital beauty norms, viewing their bodies as objects to be judged and improved. We see body dysmorphia, negative self-image, and permanent cosmetic damage, and mental health, all because of what we see in social media. Now we have to look at the mental health effects that people experience because of social media standards.
It's already commonly thought that there's a direct link between beauty standards and bad mental health, and that is true, but the direct cause is social comparison. American Psychological Association says that social comparison is when people evaluate their abilities and attitudes in relation to those of others, in a process that plays a significant role in self-image. People make thousands of comparisons every single day, and it's even amplified with the use of social media because you have comparison like at your fingertips, and you can, every video you're consciously or subconsciously making comparisons. So now the population has this unachievable comparison, and they compare themselves to it, and it's just not achievable. The standard also changes for each culture, like Jason said, and so it like impacts everyone. It's not just one certain group of people. This comparison can lead to depression, anxiety, lowered self-esteem, and doctor and psychological expert Yang says that we feel compelled to compare our opinions, religion, and appearance as a form of self-evaluation. So when we evaluate ourselves based on appearance, that's when we see these mental health issues come about. Given the mental health challenges linked to unrealistic images, educating people on about edited images and media becomes a crucial step in protecting self-perception.
So our first solution for the problem is to teach the common public media literacy. So this helps people recognize that online images are often unrealistic and can be fake,
and it promotes a more diverse understanding of beauty, and it can also reduce negative psychological effects caused by beauty standards.
So the evidence we see is NAWAS says that self-compassion significantly moderates the relationship between depression, appearance-based stress, and appearance comparison. So this means that we need to teach and administer self-compassion in young adolescents so that they have self-love even when they are faced to compare themselves to other people. Tim Moraz adds on to that and says that both doctors and patients feel pressured to achieve perfection due to what they see on social media. We need to teach and understand that online images aren't always true and that we are also seeing edited and perfected images that are perfectly created to show other people perfection that they want to reach. Deline says that exposure to non-idealized content improves self-acceptance and broadens users' definition of beauty. So we see that idealized content is pushed out, but non-idealized content is the raw things that we see, and that is how we know that our lives are actually not needing to be perfect and that not everyone's life is actually perfect. So all of this shows that we have to find a balance between what is pushed onto social media and how we interpret it. So that leads us to our cons and limitations.
Pros, Nora pretty much went over them, but it just decreased appearance-based stress and increase in compassion, decrease in pressure for perfection, improved self-acceptance, and broadened definitions of beauty.
But there are still limitations to this because these beauty standards are so deeply ingrained in our society, and not everybody has equal access to these teachings about media literacy, and how people interpret themselves is still affected by their own mental capacity and how they view themselves. And this leads us into our next solution.
Another solution that we came up with is promoting more realistic and diverse content. So by showing more attainable representations of beauty online from different demographics, we can encourage broader acceptance throughout society.
So more evidence to this is that Deline finds that edited images consistently receive greater visibility than realistic ones, reducing users' exposure to raw content, which is a huge problem because we don't see reality behind the screen. Hussian also says that algorithmic repetition amplifies perfected aesthetics, and then Tim Basco adds on to that saying influencer aesthetics dominate trends because platforms and companies prioritize high engagement rather than the way that we perceive ourselves.
Pros for this one, Nora already mentioned them, but just reduced exposure to edited images, less idealized content being pushed onto people so they feel less pressure to conform, and then more transparency on insecurities so that people feel less alone.
The cons of this are that people could still push whatever they want onto social media, and we can't control what everybody posts, or else that would be censorship. And a lot of beauty industries profit off of women's insecurities, and promoting like idealized content profits their businesses. So overall, we chose to go with solution 1 because it's more realistic, and although it's not a direct change and we can't change all of it, awareness is the start of a good change.
Madeline, how did your group decide to include Nora's perspective, lens, or conclusions into the overall presentation?
Yeah, so we decided to include Nora's because both Jason and I's lens talked about culture and more history. So incorporating Nora's lens on social media kind of shows how beauty standards are incorporated into today's society and how they're pushed in today's society, giving us like a modern take on our question.
Great, thank you. Nora, if you had another team member, what other perspectives or limitations could they have researched that would have made a useful contribution to your project?
Since I did social media, we talked a little bit about the algorithm and how they push idealized content rather than realistic content. So I would want our team member to further research the algorithm because it's kind of confusing and we don't really know how to change the things that people see and how they interpret it. So I think it'd be interesting to see like what the algorithm, why they push out what they do, and how it kind of forms to each viewer, because it likes to take like what your interests are and what you like and stuff like that.
Jason, what is a way in which your team's resolution makes you think differently about your own individual research?
I think our resolution of teaching media literacy really, like, that one stuck with me just because the second option was changing the algorithm, and I believe, like, with my research, like, individually, like, the cultural things, like, seeing how it's different across all cultures, and Matt's, like, hers about, like, the history and such, like, we didn't have social media then, and so, and beauty standards were still, like, inflicted upon women, and they were, like, expected to reach these standards, and I think just seeing that beauty standards are kind of like a human thing that we create for ourselves to, like, attain, that social, like, changing, like, the algorithms and stuff, we can't completely get rid of, like, insecurities and how people view themselves, so just kind of seeing that although we can't change it, but we can, like, bring awareness to it kind of in a sense that, like, not everybody's perfect, I think that, like, changed my idea of our solution and how, like, just, like, some change is better than none at all.
Thank you. Reflecting on your colleagues' work, which one had the greatest impact on your overall understanding of the problem your group identified?
I would say that Nora's did, because hers really like made it like, she researched like with social media, like how prevalent it is today specifically, and just like amplified and contribute to like how big of a problem it is. Because while Nora and Madeline did show that it has been around a while, hers, it was easier to come up with like a solution and all that stuff through her research because it was applied to today.
Okay.
Social media in school shootings. And our research question was, how do the motivations and mindsets of school shooters affect society and the public perception of safety in relationships? And criminologists Levin and Mathis said school shooters are not born violent. They are shaped over time by humiliation, isolation, and a desire to regain control. This kind of means that violent behavior you're not just born with it, it develops over time by experiences that can be bullying, family problems, or media, which is what I'm going to dive deeper into next. And our focused root problem was media, and basically media just makes school shootings worse. It desensitizes youth to violence, it causes isolation, and creates a negative psychological effect, and it amplifies hatred. And unlike previous generations, today's youth, we are constantly exposed to violent images, whether violent images, online conflicts, or comparison. And I'm gonna give it to Amy to talk about the implications.
So there are many implications of this problem aside from just shootings in general causing deaths and the tragedy of that. Social media can increase isolation and other mental health issues in people that can lead to a shooter mindset, so like depression and anxiety when you become addicted to social media. It also allows for desensitization to violence, so when someone is exposed to a lot of violence on social media, it can cause them to view it as unimportant, or glorifying content of violence on social media will also lead people to the wrong assumption that violence can lead to fame or recognition and attention. So other implications of this is that there's a correlation in the rise of shootings and the rise of media, according to CNN and Our World in Data. And the implications of shootings are obviously that schools have to implement safety measures now, and these drills can cause anxiety in students. There's a lot of pressure on teachers now, and parents as well have more fear. So
ultimately, if we don't fix the problem, violence will increase and kids will become more dependent and addicted to social media. Psychologically, kids will be prone to depression and anxiety. In society, It will become less welcoming and closed off because of fear, which worsens the condition of violence in everyday people. Next slide, please. In Child Welfare League of America, they stated that more than 25% of children witnessed violence annually, leading to chronic stress and emotional withdrawal. Side effects of not fixing our problem ultimately shows us how important the effect of social media is in school shootings.
The importance of this problem is that fear is created in communities and it overall just destroys your mental health. Social media is something almost all teenagers use every day, which means its influence is constant and significant. And like I said, it not only affects the people involved, like the students and teachers, but it also affects bigger communities, like Amy talked about, religious communities, and it overall just destroys people's mental health. If you are involved in a shooting, you'll probably go to therapy after, and it just takes a while to regain good health. And then it creates fear within the parents because they're scared to send their kids to school with this fear. And kids shouldn't be scared to go to school. They should want to go to school because that's where they get to hang out with their friends and learn and do all that stuff.
So this problem is very relevant in society today because social media is something we all use. It has become a huge part of our daily lives, regardless of whether we use it for fun or for something else. In our world today, unfortunately, violence and discord is also becoming very common. For an example, and social media is making this violence and disagreement worse. So an example of this is that on September 10th, Charlie Kirk was killed, and just a little bit later there was a shooting at Evergreen. Social media spread the video of Charlie Kirk's murder all over, and everyone saw it, and the effects of social media, like how it portrays violence and the mental health issues of that, could have encouraged even the shooting at Evergreen. And so this is a huge problem because as social media is rising, according to research and policy, violent content on social media is rising. Every year, more than 4,400 children and teens are shot and killed, and an estimated 3 million children in the US are exposed to these shootings per year. So they're seeing that on the social media that they're watching, and they're feeding off of this negatively. So up to 95% of youth ages 13 to 17 report using a social media platform. And so the rise of social media youth is shaping our world and future generations in a negative way. This is devastating reality that can be problematic and cause a repercussion that continues the cycle of violence. Now we will give it to Payne to talk about our solutions.
So throughout our research, we have orchestrated 4 different solutions that we think would best fit our issue that we have faced. One of the first solution that we believe would to limit minors' use of social media and kind of restrict what they can use and can't use with technology. The second solution that we have come up with is parent workshops. This one's a little bit more far-fetched and is a little bit more technical, since with these it would require the parents of children to come in their own time and talk more about the safety of their kids and understand more with that and what that implies. The third option would be to restrict the content for youth, and this can also include video games, movies, things such as that. Yes, video games and movies have restrictions on them, like rated R, PG-13, 17+, but it comes to a different level when it comes to violence, and that is one solution that we can face. Another way is make it mandatory for a process to go live or just be on social media. We see that this can be a solution to hopefully help limit the attention-seeking behaviors that a lot of past school shooters have flagged. We believe that the best solution would be to limit the children's access to social media, encouraging more in-person interaction and reducing isolation, which then affects the desensitization that Gabby was talking about before, and it improves its mental health overall, and hopefully it can remove the platform for this attention-seeking behavior ideal. Next, we'll talk more about the arguments that are with and for this.
So this is a good solution because it can reduce the exposure to violence, which can cause desensitization and stress. So according to US Secret Services, viewing violence causes desensitization and stress, which can lead to an unhealthy view of violence,
creating the misguided view that it isn't that big a deal, can lead to fame, or is normal. So by taking away social media, we limit these views and we build a healthier view of violence so that it is taken more seriously. And we can also reduce like isolation and attention-seeking behaviors, because media, when someone becomes addicted to it, they might isolate and remove themselves from their social circles or their families even, according to Social Media Victims Law Center. So by taking away media, people are forced to interact with each other instead of seeking that attention that they're lacking in real life relationships by spreading their actions on social media, like violence. So it can also reduce mental illnesses like depression and anxiety. So it would not only decrease the conditions that could cause a shooter to develop, such as these mental health issues, but it would also better the health of all people in general. So overall, our solution has a great many benefits, including reducing mental illness, isolation, and anxiety in all youth, not just for potential shooters. According to the psychology of quitting social media, just by reducing your time on Facebook, stress levels are decreased significantly. So most don't escalate as far as to become a shooter, but all who are exposed to violence and social media in this way have the potential to, and all are affected by this underlying sickness that social media causes. And our solution is so important because limiting social media not only reduces shooters, but it helps everyone.
So some pros of limiting social media is that it can overall improve our mental health. Brown Health University states that the more time spent on social media can lead to cyberbullying, social anxiety, depression, and exposure to content that's not age appropriate. So by limiting this, we can kind of fade away from like bad mental health for kids especially. Another pro is that it encourages more in-person interaction. It is so important that high schoolers get that interaction because it overall just builds their self-esteem by seeing each other, and it's way better to see your best friend in person than just text them and like get a raw reaction in a way. So some cons about this is that it's the main way like we like to communicate with people. So the National Library of Medicine explains that social media can help kids maintain and build new social connections. So like whether we talk to relatives or speaking to friends across the country, that's how we like keep our relationships with people. Another con is that we express our own beliefs and find similar interests. When we're online, we usually follow people that we like, what like content they create, and just like finding those similar interests can make us happy that knowing that someone agrees with the same feeling. So having the solution is hard because we are putting limits on such a big part of our daily lives, but at the same time, it will benefit so many people. Now let's look at implications and limitations.
Some implications we had was to promote safer online behavior and awareness of privacy settings. The positives of this would be reducing isolation and depression, improving mental health for the youth, increasing social skills, and ultimately resulting in healthier kids and less school shootings. Some negatives is that kids can't connect with other kids that share their same interests. They can't connect with long distance family members, and it limits their creative ability and personal views.
Some limitations about this is that social media is always constantly changing. We get millions of posts every day on like Instagram or like TikTok, and so this makes rules like really hard to keep up with. Another limitation is that kids can resist restrictions, meaning that they always find a way around it. Everytown research and policy states that 13 is the common age where kids use social media, but nearly 40% of children 8 to 12 are starting to use social media. So that means that kids and younger generations are finding new ways, like are being access to the social media, which means they can find new ways to get around all the rules.
Awesome. And to kind of close up our closure and all the points that we have in this situation, I think that the main takeaways is social media use. It increases alongside school shootings. Me and Gabby found that very common in both of our research with psychological and sociological. We also can see that youth is desensitized by being exposed to violence. Kate really found that in her media lens. Anxiety, fear, and attention-seeking behaviors increase immensely with these media uses. But if we limit use media, this can not only just help our outcome, but it also addresses the root issues that we struggle with so greatly, and it will also encourage this in-person connection that will uplift our community. So overall, a healthier future with better mental health, safer schools, and a better community can be in display if we act now. Thank you.
Hey, Kylie, if you had another team member, what other perspectives or limitations could they have researched that would have made a useful contribution to your project?
So if we had another team member, I would have liked to had like the political side of this and how the government enforces things like school shootings. So like what they've done in the past and like if that's worked or not and what they could do in the future to see if that will help prevent it.
Annie, what is an example of a compelling argument from one of your peers' IRRs that you decided to exclude from your presentation and why?
So Kylie had really good research about the warning signs with social media, and we sort of decided to exclude that because it was hard to talk about social media's influence on like making warning signs hard to like recognize, and so we didn't include it because media didn't have a huge impact on that.
Thank you. Gabby, how did your group decide to include Kate's perspective, lens, or conclusions in the overall presentation?
Kate's perspective was kind of our main central focus point because she focused on social media and warning signs and how school shooters use digital platforms before and after attacks. So it gave us a big platform of social media that we could build off of for the presentation.
Peyton, describe an argument from one of your peers' IRRs that made you think differently about your team's solution or conclusion.
Kind of going back to Kate's research, since her lens was media, she really opened a different door and perspective to me, seeing how many kids use media and how since I was the psychological lens, seeing how those media numbers really correlated with the numbers I found in my psychological lens, it made me realize that there's a lot more to these issues and these outcomes than just the initial physical act, and a lot of it is through the phone and through technology which we created.
Kate, give one specific way your thinking changed as a result of learning about Annie's findings.
So one way my thinking about our resolution kind of changed with Annie's is because Annie's focused on religion and how you can be targeted in school shootings because of your religion, and so my mind kind of changed on that. It won't always result in social media and online platforms. It can go even deeper to your religion part of it, which is kind of sad to think about.
Okay, thank you.
As we're all female athletes, we wanted to research something that we are all passionate about. So that led us to our research question of how does allowing biological men to compete in women's sports affect fairness and equality in athletic competitions? So why is this relevant? Well, in the past 5 years, there's been a significant increase in the amount of transgender athletes, and people wonder how do we deal with this? Is this something new? And they have many opinions. And after seeing the experiences of athletes like Peyton McNabb, a volleyball player who was concussed after taking a hit to the head from a transgender athlete, or Cece Telfer, a transgender athlete who was banned from her track competition, people have many opinions and they propose different solutions. Now, after looking at all of our lenses, political, which focused on the Democratic versus Republican point of view, medical, which focused on the biological differences between men and women, experiential, which focused on the personal experience of both transgender athletes and biological female athletes, social, which would be the differences in opinions of the public, and then religious, which is the difference of beliefs from the Catholic Church, Mormon Church, and evangelical Christians, we have 2 proposed solutions.
So,
Sorry. These solutions would be having full participation of transgender athletes with women, so the transgender athletes would compete with biological females, or having each athlete compete with their biological gender, so biological males would compete with the transgender woman and females would stick with biological females.
so the first solution is allowing transgender to compete in female sports. So some of the pros would be, according to Isla's research that she found that Reddy said sports should promote acceptance and feel inclusive to all athletes. By promoting inclusion, sports teaches athletes that to value diversity and challenge stereotypes. And then allowing trans to compete in female sports would help with equal opportunity for trans athletes. According to Gia's research, Hilton says that trans athletes should have the same opportunity and rights as female athletes.
And then some cons of this solution of letting trans compete in female sports would be the biological differences from male puberty that transgender athletes have compared to those of biological women. And Dr. Lakshmi in India ran tests with where bar bodies were studied to see the presence of XX chromosomes, and it was tested with fluorescent and light microscopy, and she found clear differences between the presence of XX chromosomes in that of transgender women and that of biological women. And then men also have 40% more upper body strength than that of the average women, and they can retain this. The transgender women can retain this even after years of transitioning and using hormone therapy and surgery and stuff like that. And then transgender women are also competing at a very high level because of some advantages they have, like height, a larger frame, more lung capacity, power, strength, and just overall muscle mass. And all of these advantages are because of the different bodies they have, because they're biologically males and not females.
The limitations that we have are fairness, safety, and equality. So for fairness, it's not fair for biological athletes to be competing with transgender athletes. Like Gia said, there's different biological differences between them, so there's different strengths for men than there are for women, making it unfair for them to be put up against each other. And that also goes into equality, because men and women are not the same and they don't have the same characteristics. So therefore they're not equal in that type of way. And then with safety, they have different characteristics, like Gia said and like Sydney said, and based on those, it leads to different strengths for both women and men, causing a high risk of injury for both athletes, whether they're transgender or biological. And then backlash versus support. For backlash, we have conservatives/Republicans and female athletes. Female athletes want to be able to compete with the people that are of their skill level, their gender, and similar to them. And Republicans generally don't agree with the LGBTQ community. Obviously, there's some people that do, but most of the Republicans, their main thing is they don't support that. And then for support, we have liberals/Democrats and then transgender women athletes. Transgender women athletes want to be able to compete in the category that they believe they are. So if it's a transgender woman, they think they're a female and they want to be able to compete with females because they believe they're a female, and vice versa. And then Democrats generally, they agree with the LGBTQ community, so they support transgender athletes competing in whatever category they would like to compete in.
Okay, our second solution is that they have to compete in their biological category. So transgender athletes would have to compete with biological males. So the first pro to this is that it protects females who are already competing in the sports. This is supported by many people, and Janikowski states
The organization demands that the protection of women's sports from trans women's participation and women's rights be based on one sex, assigned at birth. Our second pro is that it keeps safety for all athletes involved. This is supported by Pike author, and he states the safety conditional if there is an increased risk of injury from the inclusion of trans women in women's game, then it is unsafe for trans women to compete in women's category.
So some cons to this proposed solution is that there isn't any satisfaction for transgender athletes, and a study done by published author Tietzel found that the exclusion of transgender athletes from competing with biological women leads to a negative impact on one's overall mental health, and this can lead to things like anxiety and depression. And there's also a study done by Burnett and Ines in Gia's research that found that hormone therapy undergone when transitioning can actually reduce the biological advantages enough for fair competition. So this would mean that transgender women could compete with biological females if there is enough reduction of advantages to take place for fair competition.
So some of the limitations that we have is inclusion, fairness, and diversity. So for inclusion, female or biological females want to compete with who they believe is also as well biological females but they do not want to have the inclusion of the biological males. For the fairness, while the solution aims to protect fairness in women's sports, it could also be viewed as unfair from the transgender females. And for diversity, some do argue that separating divisions by biological sex does limit diversity. And then the backlash versus support. So for the backlash, it would be the liberals and Democrats, as well as transgender women athletes. Transgender women athletes want to compete in where they feel that they belong in the women's sports, and liberals and Democrats generally are for LGBTQ communities. And for support would be the Republicans and the female athletes. The female athletes want to compete against people that are also biological females and that have the same biological advantages as them, and Republicans usually are against the LGBTQ community.
Okay, in conclusion, through all of our research done, Kendall through social, Sydney through religion, Isla through political, Gia through medical, and me through experiential, we decided that the best solution would be to have biological people compete with their biological competitors. This means that the transgender athletes would compete with their biological males, and females would compete only against females. We think this solution would be the best because it promotes fairness, equality, and safety for all athletes involved. Thank you.
Isla, describe an argument from one of your peers, IRRs, that made you think differently about your team's solution or conclusion.
Yeah, so Malin's research and her interviewing different athletes really made me think differently about our project as a whole, because she interviewed personal stories of athletes and sharing their stories, especially the biological females who are affected by transgender athletes like Peyton McNabb and Riley Gaines really made me think on how big of an impact the transgender athletes have in a negative way that impacts the fairness in the community with the biological females.
Thank you. Sydney, if you had another team member, what other perspectives or limitations could they have researched that would have made a useful contribution to the project?
If we had another team member, I would really like to see the perspective of refs and other professionals working in athletic competitions and see what their thoughts are and how they view this problem and how they would think would be the best solution.
Gia, how did your group decide to include Kendall's perspective, lens, or conclusions in the overall presentation?
We included Kendall's research in our overall presentation in many ways because she had a social lens, which was a big part of our presentation because the people's view on transgenders competing in women's sports has a big impact on the laws created and the policies overall.
Thank you. Malin, give one specific way your thinking has changed as a result of learning about Isla's findings.
So I think that my thinking has changed after reading about Isla's all people's political views is because I didn't realize how big of a topic this was and how much like people felt passionate about this. Because at first when I was just looking at my lens of people involved, I didn't really think that people that weren't getting impacted by this would have such a say in it. But through looking at Isla's lens of both the Democrats and Republicans, I saw that more people are passionate about it than I thought.
Thank you. And Kendall, what is an example of a compelling argument from one of your peers' IRRs that you decided to exclude from the presentation and why?
Sydney had really good research. Everyone else's topic was super it had both sides of the story, where Sydney's was the religious section, and every single religion thought that transgender athletes should compete in their biological category. And so it was all just one perspective and there weren't multiple perspectives, so it was hard to incorporate hers into both sides of the story.
Got it, thank you.
Picture a young Muslim woman who has recently moved from her home country of Algeria to Hanover, Germany, with the hope of pursuing a prosperous life for herself by establishing a prosperous career in nursing. However, upon settling in a small apartment building, she realizes that some people don't have the same plan for her life. One man in particular approaches her on multiple occasions, making aggravated comments about her religious practices. After much harassment and an attempted forced entry of her home, she is found bleeding out in the stairwell of her apartment building, having been stabbed multiple times until the fatal blow to her heart was struck. While the man who had been harassing her was convicted of murder, but this tragedy cannot be undone, and her family is left to grieve the life she could have had. This is the story of Rama Ayad, a 26-year-old Muslim immigrant. While every story is unique, many Muslims experience hostility from their host societies when immigrating into new European cultures. This poses the question, what challenges do Muslims face when integrating into traditionally Christian Western European societies today? How can these challenges be resolved?
Before we examine the specific social challenges faced by Muslim immigrants, we must first identify the conditions that led to these challenges arising. We begin with the perceived social change in the social order, where we find, via the findings of political scientist Serdar Kaya, that the presence of an official Muslim church in a European state leads to heightened levels of European discrimination against Muslim identities, as Muslim identifying persons are identified as more so as immigrants with culture contrary to my own, as opposed to the more objective belief of simply immigrants into my country. Stronger identity, of course, leads to heightened levels of discrimination, which is as described in Jason Snitker's dueling effect, where Muslim immigrants with stronger identities may find themselves with stronger support systems within the in-group, but face heightened discrimination from the out-group. This discrimination may manifest in overt displays of it or in implicit social stigmas held by the European nationals, which may not be stated outright. Now we will focus on the specific economic and political implications and challenges faced by Muslim identifying persons.
The opposing social perceptions created by perceived religious identifications create social stigmas that lead to, that directly affect employment. 3 professors of political science found that there is a significant employment gap between those who religiously identify as Muslim and those who do not. Other variables, including skill and ethnicity, were all kept constant in the study. The only uniquely discriminating factor was found to be religious identification. This phenomenon directly increases Muslim distrust to their host nation's governments. A study conducted by Stephanie Musig and Inken Okrug found that Muslims' trust in their government institutions, such as the police and parliament, and even their court systems, was decreased due to the existence of an employment gap. This in turn causes friction between the 2 groups, which is an issue because both the Muslim migrants and their host nation's governments need to work together in order for Muslim religious practices to effectively continue in Europe.
Given the information that Luke and Brody gave, it is tempting to believe that these issues and problems are simply a part of the integration process, or that they'll just go away if we do not do anything about them. Studies show that the opposite is true. A study on whether or not European natives would want a Muslim immigrant as their neighbor shows that 14.4% of of native Europeans in 1999 did not want Muslim immigrants as neighbors. This increased to 17.6% in 2008 and then to 21.3% in 2017. This is a 7% increase in the span of about 20 years, and it shows that doing nothing about this problem only makes it worse. The second issue that people tend to believe is that Muslim immigration itself will only decrease over time, and so the Muslim population in these countries will stay the same or even decrease. Studies show that this is also not the case. As a study done by political scientist Mustafa and Clavins shows that the projected population of Muslims in these countries goes from 23.1% in 2014 to 36.5% projected for 2035. This shows that these problems are only continue to get worse when nothing is done to it, and why a solution is so necessary. Caleb will give you solutions now.
The only way that one can truly effectively implement solutions to this type of problem is to create state-level policies that enact both social and institutional changes that fundamentally shift how society perceives each other. There are 2 primary approaches to how this can be done. The first of these is an assimilationist approach, in which Muslim identity and communities are mostly discarded in favor of a more personal moral choices for each Muslim. One study by Asif Mohiuddin and Abhadi bin Borham, who are human scientists, showed that one in particular institution, known as the European Council for Fatwa and Research, has actually begun to implement this type of thing with more specific individual choices as opposed to a legal tradition that is traditionally held by Islam. Creating these more individual choices allows both Europeans and Muslims to integrate into one national community rather than their individual separated communities, allowing for heightened cultural integration between the 2 groups. However, one major limitation of this approach is that more devout followers of the Islam tradition are going to oppose it as it bends their culture to a more European style of society. The other approach is a multiculturalist approach, in which both societies are underneath the same nation but are more separated. Usually these communities become more geographically separated, with communities of both Europeans and Islams living separately and only really truly interacting with their own cultures. Now, this does not necessarily mean that they are not cooperating together, as in true multiculturalism, they both interact with the state government and one another in cooperation and peace. But this approach does allow for a more full cultural retainment rather than bending the cultures to fit one another. However, one major drawback of this approach is that being exposed to only one's own ideas can lead to increased rates of radicalism, as shown by Javier Jordan in a particular essay on how grassroots jihadist movements, in other words, holy war sentiments being spread among non-organizations, just among communities, can be easily formed in even apparently socially integrated societies, because those societies are integrating into their in-groups rather than with the out-group. Our team has selected the assimilationist approach as the more beneficial approach because it creates it fundamentally creates more integration between the two groups. Whereas a multiculturalist approach retains the original communities, they do not truly unite into one community, creating a more us versus them attitude that is often promoted. Thank you.
Hey. Jenna, how did your group decide to include Mitchell's perspective, lens, or conclusions in the overall presentation?
Mitchell did a whole bunch of research on statistics and how those could incorporate into the future. And we chose to incorporate those specific statistics and to be able to portray how this could become a bigger issue in the future, rather than simmering down as some people might think it is.
Thank you. Brody, if you had another team member, what other perspectives or limitations could they have researched that would have made a useful contribution to your project?
A historical paper written about the past of Muslim immigration could have added to our project. We have future projections for what the condition could become, but we could also have used some past projections to see what it came from, to see the changes between Muslim immigration in the past and now, and compare that to how it looks in the future.
Thank you. Luke, please give one specific way your thinking changed as a result of learning about Caleb's findings.
So initially I thought that Muslim integration into Christian Europe would be nearly impossible because the diametrically opposed views and cultures. However, Caleb's findings of assimilation, specifically in his research specifically into pillarization in the Netherlands, allowed me to see that there are methods to where integration is possible and assimilation is possible. It just bends their religion a little bit. So there are still issues, but his research allowed me to have a more open mind, a more optimistic view, as opposed to what I originally had.
Thank you. Mitchell, please describe an argument from one of your peers' IRRs that made you think differently about your team's solution or conclusion.
In Brody's IRR, he had information on the opposing values of Muslim immigrants and European natives, and how that their fundamentally opposed values opposed each other, and that made me rethink our solution, because changing someone's core values is very difficult.
Great, thank you. And Caleb, what gives an example of a compelling argument from one of your peers' IRRs that you decided to exclude from the presentation and why?
Mitchell, in his paper, made the argument that there were many individuals who are immigrating from traditionally Muslim countries that are harmed by war and other factors that force immigration because of unrest at home. And therefore, but these individuals do not necessarily desire to integrate with a European society, but rather would prefer to just live in peace in their own Muslim tradition. While this could have been useful to examine more people who would have been opposed to something like the assimilationist mindset, we decided not to include it because that effect is significantly reduced for second-generation immigrants. The children of those immigrants will not hold as much of an isolationist and non-integration perspective because they are being raised in the new host society.
Okay, great, thank you.
Trauma affects millions of people worldwide, yet those who experience it are still often misunderstood and stereotyped due to deeply rooted social stigmas. According to World Health Organization 2024, 70% of people worldwide experience a traumatic event during their lifetime. That's 5.8 billion people and their families that are affected by trauma. Despite how common trauma is, survivors are still marginalized as weak, abnormal, and mentally unstable, causing negative perceptions in social settings. These stigmatized attitudes not only shape the public's perception, but affect the survivors' relationships and mental health. To what extent do stigmas associated with trauma create social and psychological barriers and separations between survivors and others?
Outside perspectives are an incredibly important tool that survivors can use to assimilate back into a world that they no longer remember. Observation of others, usually through actual interaction, can shape their thoughts about themselves. Positive support and other communication can increase their beliefs that they can truly heal. This is shown with Weiss, a researcher who wrote in her personal journal that she kept in the years following her health crisis that her family's happiness reminded her of joy when she didn't think she would ever feel those kinds of feelings again. They can use others as an example to prove to themselves that things will get better, but because of stigmas and stereotypes, these interactions are normally more negative in nature. Stigmas and stereotypes can cause people to make inaccurate assumptions about trauma survivors. This can lead to awkward interactions that negatively affect survivors because they assume they made an error, and this can cause them to go into a mental spiral. Emily Dokwilio and Jared Brzezinski are researchers who were published in the Journal of Traumatic Stress, and they researched individuals with PTSS, which is post-traumatic stress syndrome, and they discovered that they have overly negative perceptions of themselves, and these perceptions are characterized by beliefs that one is broken, others cannot be trusted, and negative outcomes are likely. This shows that trauma survivors are more susceptible to feelings of guilt and shame because of what they have gone through. Being treated differently because of something that happened to you and not something that you did can be very discouraging. Perceptions can lay the groundwork for withdrawn behavior and give final proof that returning to normal life is impossible, and in turn, that can negatively affect personal relationships.
Trauma in and of itself has a very impactful negative impact on the survivor, but when that trauma gets stigmatized, that impact can worsen. As presented by Anna Maria Lashke, who is a member of the Department of Psychology and Center for Social Issues Research, survivors are more likely to disidentify from people with similar experiences when they feel that their trauma is stigmatized. Stigmas make survivors disconnect from their peers and be unable to reach out or find connection with others. Stigmas affect self-identity and relationships that survivors have with themselves as well. National Center for Mental Health psychologist Katrin Lewis says that an estimated prevalence of self-stigma was 41.2%. So that means that almost half of survivors have lasting effects on their personal perceptions due to stigmas. Stigmas lead to interpersonal disconnectedness, which is a lack of connection or relatability with others. This greatly damages their mental health and decreases likelihood and willingness to reach out to those around them.
this can harm those who have relationships with the survivors as well as the survivors themselves. Healthy relationships are extremely important for trauma recovery, and in cases like these, when stigma is perceived and self-stigma prevails, it is so hard for those survivors to build or create impactful relationships.
Trauma can change how the brain processes fear, memory, and emotion, and because of this, survivors are viewed as abnormal, and others usually don't understand it most of the time if they haven't experienced that trauma. These misunderstood behaviors and symptoms are labeling survivors as different, and this causes stigma and social separation. One of the most misunderstood behaviors is known as self-triggering, and this happens when survivors feel a lack of control over their flashbacks, their intrusive thoughts, and their memories because of when something triggers them, and they get those, and so because of this, they try to then trigger themselves to feel in control again. Hodgkin et al. Talks about this, and they are credible researchers in psychology and appear in the Journal of Traumatic Stress. And when survivors are repeatedly judged for their coping mechanisms, this causes greater stigma, and they begin to withdraw themselves from social situations as a way as self-protection. This highlights that stigma pushes survivors away rather than letting them get the support that they need. Sorry. Ehlers and Clark, they have strong reputations in trauma and psychology, and they are most well known for their cognitive model of PTSD. They explain how trauma alters the brain processing of stress and memory. And these should make the behaviors of trauma survivors more predictable, but others who have not gone through that do not think that way. Instead, that they push them away, which causes stigma, and survivors cannot get the support that they need.
A way to combat the stigmatization of trauma survivors is through art therapy. And Merriam-Webster Dictionary describes it as therapy based on engagement in artistic activities such as drawing or painting as means of creative expression and symbolic communication, especially in individuals affected with mental or emotional disorder or cognitive impairment. It is important to note, however, that art therapy is mainly used to treat the trauma symptoms rather than the stigmatization. However, the exhibits and artworks created in the sessions can be used to spread awareness and address the stigmatization and stereotypes, which reduces the stigma. Examples of successful exhibits include Yellow Power by Yoon Park, which her and her team created yellow panels of silk that had interview quotes of racist remarks made against Asian people. Additionally, the Carts project was used when participants were given a shopping cart to transform into a representation of who they were as a person. Both projects created unity and awareness of the stigmatization. Where to start? In collaboration with local communities, our solution would generate more art festivals to reduce stigma rather than continue the cycle of otherness.
Art therapy is a therapy. It was not originally designed for destigmatization purposes, and it would need organization and careful planning in order to do this purpose. Specific classes and programs need leadership and funding, so a specific organization would need to be created that could partner with other organizations like an art museum and create events that have tickets or require donations to attend. And finally, participation. It's no good creating a work of art that describes your feelings if no one's there to see it or try and understand you. That's where our second solution comes in. It's helping others understand how to connect with survivors, which increases the chance of this solution working well.
To aid the solution of art therapy, we looked into the solution of education. So traumas tend to come from a lack of knowledge, or not traumas, stigmas tend to come from a lack of knowledge about a topic, which can then lead to stereotypes and generalizations. It's not necessarily to hurt, but harm always almost is a latent effect. So as seen before, the stigmas are greatly damaging to survivors in many aspects of their life. And to stop stigmas at the source before they spread, we can look into education. Studies about the effects of stigma on trauma survivors is evolving, and it's very clear that these effects should be public knowledge. According to Eileen Zurbergen, a member of the Department of Psychology at the University of California, in order to best help trauma survivors and close the door, and those close to them, it is imperative that research exploring these issues be presented to research communities, clinical practitioners, and the public in general. Awareness of the effects of trauma will lead to societies developing more knowledge and lack of stigmas arising. And this will provide not just trauma survivors with their understanding that they need, but also aid those that they have relationships with. Where can we start this? We can look into education in schools, specifically high schools, as those students are more mentally capable of grasping this topic. And we can also partner with the National Institute of Mental Health to aid and expand.
Although education is overall great and highly beneficial to everyone, it only rejects stigmas. It doesn't automatically fix the traumatic event. Victims are still going to experience social, relational, and psychological strain, and it's not going to change just because their close ones understand them. Yes, it can speed up the process, but it doesn't fix anything. Additionally, it is super easy to revert back to public perceptions when not seeing a clear path of growth or healing. Additionally, there's no guarantee that society will consistently fund and support these changes into the education system aimed at improving the understanding of trauma survivors. It would require financial stability and professional teachers. Without adequate funding, these initiatives become fragmented, inaccessible, or short-term, limiting their impact on changing or reducing stigmas. Furthermore, it is impossible to change everyone's attitudes and their willingness to learn about trauma responses. Some actively resist learning due to discomfort, personal biases, or cultural beliefs. Trauma-related stigma, being emotionally and psychologically ingrained and not purely rooted in lack of information, means that increased awareness alone has limited power to change people's behavior and perceptions.
So education and art-based therapy works best together to reduce stigma surrounding trauma. As Alex explained, education addresses the root of stigmatization by increasing public awareness and correcting misunderstandings about trauma. And while Bree talked about art therapy and art activism, it allows the survivors to communicate their experiences in ways that cannot be said in words. So pairing those two together, it is a better solution because not only are people more informed, but they get to be more emotionally engaged with the survivors and their experiences. And so it is the most effective way to reduce stigma and strengthen the community about understanding what is going on with them and to promote acceptance of trauma survivors.
All right. Megan, describe an argument from one of your peers' IRRs that made you think differently about your team's solution or conclusion.
One of the things that made me think differently was Bree's research. Wait, can you repeat the question?
Mm-hmm. Describe an argument from one of your peers' individual reports that made you think differently about your team's solution or conclusion.
Yeah, Bree's work made me think differently about our team's solution. I mean, she really was with our first solution, but it made all of us think differently because with most of our researches and their overlap, it was a lot about people who haven't experienced a traumatic event branching out to those who have. So she brought in like new information about that stigmatized individuals can reach out to the normal population.
Thank you. Tabitha, reflect reflecting on your colleagues' work, which one had the greatest impact on your overall understanding of the problem that your group identified?
The colleague that had the most impact on my overall understanding of our problem was Megan's. She looked at very specific stigmas and subsequent specific effects and how they will affect these individuals for years to come, and how necessary it is for this problem to be solved, because it creates an already hard situation even worse.
Alex, what is an example of a compelling argument from one of your peers' IRRs that you decided to exclude from the presentation, and why?
A very compelling argument was from Megan's IRR. She had like a broader lens. She examined both the negative, positive, and more neutral effects of stigmas, and I would have loved to include more of that, especially the positive. I think it was extremely interesting to see how people can really build themselves up despite stigmas, but it was hard to kind of weave it in with the rest of our research, so unfortunately we did have to leave it out.
Yael, if you had another team member, what other perspective or limitation could they have researched that would have made a useful contribution to your project?
I think a medical or a neurological lens would have been a good add, since all of ours talk about we have a psychological lens, we have a relational lens, we have a social one, artistic and futuristic. So I think a medical and neurological one would work, would fit in really well, since they would, I think, look at the brain and how the neurons and the nervous system may change because of trauma. So I think that would be a great add to our research, and it would further strengthen our arguments.
Thank you. And Bree, what is a way in which your team's resolution makes you think differently about your own research?
So my research was through the artistical and philosophical lens. Mainly in our resolution was art therapy, was a big part of my research. Our additional solution of education was helped a lot in my thinking. I'm sorry, can I please repeat the question?
What is a way in which your team's resolution makes you think differently about your own individual research?
So my research consists of the artistic lens, and our resolution of education helped aid my research by providing more of a realistic outlook. Our exhibits